Good morning, students, and welcome to another English class. Today we are going to take up a poem from your book, Communicate with Cambridge. The name of the poem is Home They Brought Her Warrior Dead. Now let's talk about the author first. Alfred Lord Tennyson remains one of the most renowned poets of all time. His most famous quote comes from his poem, In Memoriam, in which he says, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." This quote has stood the test of time, remaining a source of hope and comfort to everyone who has ever loved and lost someone. This quote also coincides with the poem, Home They Brought Her Warrior Dead. For even though the widow had lost the love of her life and was left to raise a child alone, it was better that she had the chance to love him. Now let's connect the author with the poem. Having lost his father and close friend, Tennyson was well aware of the pain of losing someone, and yet he still claims that it is better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. His personal experience with loss makes the words more real to the reader who might have also suffered the loss of a loved one. He was not directly involved in war in his life, but he had seen the tragedy of the Crimean War. His poetry gave great comfort to Queen Victoria, who had lost her husband. Introduction to the lesson. Home They Brought Her Warrior Dead tells the story of a woman who had lost her husband in battle. The third-person narrative allows the reader to see the widow's reaction from an outside perspective. The reader, therefore, identifies with the rest of the crowd of gathered people and experiences the same concern for the widow and confusion at her reaction. For the first few stanzas, the widow is seen only as a woman who has lost her husband. However, the last stanza reveals that she is not only a widow but also a mother. This insight sheds light on her reaction, allowing the readers to understand what had been going through her mind as she realized that her husband was dead and she would have to raise the child alone. Now let's discuss the new words. Uttered, make a sound with one's voice. Worthy, a person important in a particular sphere. Noblest, having fine personal qualities or high moral principles. Foe, an enemy or opponent. Maiden, an unmarried girl or young woman. Wept, which means cried. Now let's discuss the word meanings. Swooned, meaning lost consciousness. Maidens, female helpers. Stepped, moved up to. Tempest, which means thunderstorm. You, uttered, make a sound with one's voice. Weep, which means cry. Foe, enemy. Noblest, belonging to a rank, title or birth to the aristocracy. Wept, cried. Now let's discuss the poem in detail. We will go stanza-wise. Home they brought her warrior dead. She nor swooned nor uttered cry. All her maidens watching said, "She must weep or she will die." The speaker describes the reaction of a woman when her dead husband was brought back to her. Her grief is so overwhelming she cannot even cry. She didn't faint or swoon or make even a noise. Her friends watched her and they became worried about her because she seemed not to grieve properly. They thought she might die if she did not weep as she should. They believed that if this woman did not grieve, the pain she refused to let out would eventually kill her. Let's move on to the second stanza. They then praised him, soft and low, called him worthy to be loved, truest friend and noblest foe. Yet she neither spoke nor moved. As in many instances of death, the people around the dead man praised him. They talked about his life, about the good that he did. They called him worthy to be loved, and they talked about the kind of friend he was to them. They called him true and noble. Yet, as the people around her grieved and spoke memories about her dead husband, the wife could not speak or move. She remained still. No one knew what was going on in her mind, but she seemed to be in a state of shock. No amount of reminiscence seemed to bring tears to the widow's eyes. She was yet unmoved. Perhaps she was unable to accept the death, even as those around her spoke of him and paid tribute to his memory. The people around her are not sure why the woman refuses to show emotion, But they surround her with words of praise for her husband, hoping to break her out of her shock so that they might be there to comfort her. Let's carry on with the third stanza. Stole a maiden from her place, lightly to the warrior stepped, took the face cloth from the face, yet she neither moved nor wept. Because the woman still refuses to grieve, one of the young women present walks up to the dead man and removes the cloth that was covering his face. Perhaps, she thought, that his wife was unable to grieve because she still could not believe or accept that this dead man was her husband. The people around the widow clearly believed that the woman ought to grieve. Thus, because she will not show any signs of grief when the people spoke of him, this particular friend shows her the face of her dead husband, hoping that this will help the woman to break out of her state of shock and be able to grieve properly. Let's move on to the last fourth stanza. Rose a nurse of 90 years, set his child upon her knee. Like summer tempest came her tears. Sweet my child, I live for thee. The speaker finally reveals to the readers the reason for the widow's silence. She has not been unfeeling or careless of her husband's death. She has not even been in shock or disbelief like the people around her thought. Rather, she has been paralyzed with fear. She did not think about her own pain at losing her husband. Rather, she thought of the poor child. It was not until she saw the child's nurse sit the child upon her knee that she burst forth in uncontrollable tears that came like a summer tempest. She cried out, Sweet my child, I'll live for thee. Now, this poem is about a widow, a lady who has just lost her husband in battle. For her, being a mother comes before being a wife. She is not unfeeling at the thought of her dead husband and what has happened, but before being a wife, she is a mother, and she is paralyzed with fear at the thought that this child is going to grow up without a father. The sole breadwinner of the family is not there anymore, and it's not like she cannot feel the death of her husband. It's because she's paralyzed with fear because this child is about to grow up without a father, and that's what scares her the most. When she finally sees the child, that's when she realizes that she's a single mother now. She has to raise the child alone, and that's when she cries and she says, Sweet my sweet child, now I'll only live for you. I live for thee. Let's move on to the central idea of the poem. The poem revolves around the death of a warrior and his lady who is so shocked by the death that she is unable to emote any feelings onto her face. The maidens try to get the lady to weep by narrating the great conquests and the noble nature of their expired master, but still do not manage to succeed. Eventually, after the sheet from the warrior's face is removed, the lady weeps, but not at her husband's feet, but at the face of her young child, whom she now has to raise on her own. Let's discuss the poetic devices used in the poem. Now, I have mentioned the lines beside the poetic device so that it's easier for you to find. Let's see what is an alliteration. Now, what is an alliteration? An alliteration is a poetic device where a single word or a syllable, a sound or the syllable, the word, letter is repeated. Let's look at the following examples. The first one, which is in line 2, she nor swooned. The S letter over here is repeated. Let's move on to the next example. She must weep or she will die. Now the S sound, she must weep or she will die. The S letter over here is repeated. Truest friend and noblest foe, F and F. The F letter sound over here is repeated. Took the face cloth from the face. Now again over here the F letter, the F sound over here is repeated. Rose a nurse of 90 years. Now in this line, N, the N letter, the N syllable over here is repeated, hence it is an alliteration. Now the example of the simile used in the poem is, like summer tempest came her tears. She cried a lot. It was like a summer rain. A harsh a long summer rain, a hard summer rain. That's how hard she cried. Let's discuss the rhyme scheme of the poem. Home they brought her warrior dead. She nor swooned nor uttered cry. All her maidens watching said, she must weep or she will die. Now over here you can see dead rhymes with said. So this is the first sound, A, and cry rhymes with die. So it's the second sound, which is BB. Hence the rhyme scheme of the poem is AB, AB. Conclusion. The poem is a reflection of the sorrowful life of a widow who has to worry about her child after the sole breadwinner of the family is no more. The poem brings the reader to see through the eyes of the grieving maidens and also through the eyes of the concerned mother, that is, the widow whose only sole reason for living is for the sake of her child. Tennyson beautifully portrays the strong and overbearing nature of motherhood that forgets all the sorrow in the world when their child is in most need of their love and affection. I would like you to make sentences with the following words. I hope you understood the poem. If you have any problem, you can ask me in class. Thank you for watching.